personal acceptance and rejection, couples, and clinical practices and outcomes. Dr. Melendez-Rhodes has presented her research in national and international conferences and published scholarly work in peer-reviewed journals. Also joining us is Dr. Ana Caro Cárdenas. Dr. Caro Cárdenas has a doctorate in clinical psychology from Chestnut Hill College in Pennsylvania, USA, with a concentration in marriage and family therapy. She has more than 20 years of experience as a family therapist with families in crisis and/or affected by psychological trauma. Dr. Caro has presented in national and international conferences on topics related to trauma psychology and has been director and supervisor of several programs aimed to treat victims of violence. She was a graduate professor in the United States for 7 years, taught the specialization of trauma, psychology, and play therapy, and served as a chair in dissertation committees. Since 2013, she has been a professor of the Pontifical Catholic University of Peru at the psychology department. So about the structure of the event will have two parts. In the first part, Dr. Melendez-Rhodes and Dr. Caro will present in dialogue about the changes that have been taking place in relationships due to the pandemic. And in the last 15 minutes, we will have some time for questions, so don't forget to leave your questions through the chat box. Dear Tatiana, the floor is yours.
Okay, so I'm gonna share my screen now. So I'm just gonna try, people tell me if they can see. Can you see the screen? Yes, okay. So good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming here today and joining us in this conversation, this presentation that Dr. Caro and I, we had prepared. Again, my name is Dr. Tatiana Melendez-Rhodes. And so we're gonna be developing today the topic related to what has happened in relationships to couples and during the pandemics. So I hope you enjoy the presentation. So we know that in March 11, 2020, the World Health Organization declared the pandemic. And since then, people have changed their lives drastically. And we can spend hours and hours talking about what is the impact of those changes in families and individuals. But today we're gonna be focusing on couples relationships. So look, during the time of pandemics, what has really changed? So we're gonna walk you through that process today. So the first thing that we would like to do is to start just by citing some research that has been conducted during this time. So after the pandemic, many researchers around the world has conducted different kind of research and trying to figure out what has been the impact in couple relationship and different things. But today we will be talking about that. So what people has found is that there is an increasing number of mental health disorders. A different kind of mental health disorders just in general. Like what? Like depression, like anxiety, symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. They have found also that people with pre-existing conditions, like for example, OCD, so those symptoms has escalated tremendously. And as you can imagine, in many places around the world, there has been some constraints instead of provided immediate treatment because people were not able to attend clinics or to attend any kind of therapy. That's what many people have been working now, using telehealth. So the research that has been done in relation to couples is, for example, in Italy, they have found that there is a high prevalence of anxiety and depression for women with issues of infertility. And why? Because there was a suspension of assisted reproductive technology. So women were in the process of, the couple actually were in the process of getting the treatment. And as soon as the pandemic hit, So that has to be suspended. So we need to remember that when a couple is in treatment for this, there is a lot of anxiety because there is the uncertainty of whether or not this treatment will be successful. So if you add, this addition, so you're gonna find it as people are under high level of stress, and of course depression. So it has been found that it was more prevalent in women. So in the Philippines, for example, it was found that there was a decrease in sexual intimacy among premarital non-cohabitated partners. So what they did, so participants, they shared with researchers that they use technology-based strategies to kind of like become closer to their partners during that time. They talk about the constraints of, not being able to have physical contact with them. So even though they used some technology-based strategies, they said that they were trying to kind of like express their love through that, but of course it didn't have the same impact that it would have if they would be together. So they were trying to make sure that they enhance their trust, their love, and then communication. And if you think about, I mean, this is an example from the Philippines, but I think that around the world, people or couple who has been separated have gone through that process. So the only way that they have to communicate to each other was by using technology. But for some people, it has been rewarding, at least it's something, but for other people, it has been devastating. So the next thing that happened during the pandemic and that has hit couples is the job losses, the financial turmoil that is bring. So many people, sometimes, I mean, I met people in which both members of the couple have lost their job, they just didn't, there was an uncertainty on whether or not they were going to continue working at that particular place. Others suddenly just heard that they're gonna reduce their number of hours. So as we can imagine, that has a tremendous impact also in the couple's relationship. So not having that income that it was part of their monthly budget, so definitely generates some constraint that it will have an impact in the relationship, not only in the couple, but also in the family as well. So this part, the COVID infection, the death, and the suffering, I think that is we enumerate many of the situations or many of the constraints that people have experienced during COVID. I think that these are the most relevant. So the fear of being infected, right? Uh, Many of us, some of us, has experienced the loss of someone, of relative, of friends. Some of us, we are uncertain about our loved ones, and it can be different, depends on social location. So the reality is, for example, I am here in the United States. Most of my family are in Peru. And thinking about whether or not there is a vaccine available, and like having, for example, having people, buying their own oxygen and things like that. So all of those things create a lot of stress in the family. So also we are concerned about ourselves, we are concerned about our relative, we are concerned about our loved one. We are exposed to the media that each day was telling us all these bad things that were happening. So we became somehow hopeless, right? Some of us, we had to go through a process of grieving at multiple times. If you think about in a regular, normal situation, we lost somebody, and sometimes, we have the time and we invest our time in kind of like make sense of that loss. But in this particular situation, multiple losses happen at the same time. So some of us perhaps had better coping skills than others. Others has more support than others. And all these different kind of situations will affect people's well-being in general and the communication with couples as well. So the psychological stress also prompts an increasing of drinking consumption. Just in general, it's another study. So some people, as a result of job losses or financial situation, so their stress increase, and as a result also it increased their own drinking consumption that, as we know, also have an effect in the couple relationship. So that has been something that is being reported on a regular time, and not to mention also the increase of domestic violence as well.
Okay. Above all, I would like to thank everybody for being here. I'm Dr. Caro, and I will continue with the presentation here. Perhaps putting a little bit of light on some of the changes that have been identified in the literature. One of the things are, like Dr. Melendez was saying, is about the increased amount of stress. But something in particular that has been observed is that in contrast to other situations in which perhaps one member of the couple experiences stress, in this particular situation in the pandemic, both members of the couple are experimenting stress and high levels of stress. So it's not only an increased level of stress, but they'll call it simultaneous stress, because then that certainly can offer less opportunities for recovery, if both are experiencing high levels of stress at the same time, and therefore are both in high need of relief, of a break from this type of stress. On the other hand, there are unexpected changes and losses. Nobody expected this pandemic to occur. So certainly that adds also to the lack of preparedness that most couples and most families had in terms of what was required from them, or from us, from all of us, in terms of how to adapt to these particular changes. And in terms of the uncertainty, certainly something that contributes to the high levels of stress, particularly because we don't know when this pandemic is going to end, for instance, no? And we don't know really, or we cannot be sure how safe we really are. So even these unexpected changes, for instance, have required us to wear masks, for example, and things that we were not used to do. And there has been even disagreements in terms of whether it's necessary or not to do it, in different countries and in different times. And certainly this also has occurred within families and even between the couple members, where maybe there were different perceptions on what was needed or not, and different levels of uncertainty as well. So that also is something that has contributed to high levels of stress and perhaps even conflict in some couples. The next slide, please. Okay. Yeah. Another important consequence of the pandemic is this loss of routines. And this is just something that couples had to deal with in terms of what was expected from them in the family. For instance, what Dr. Melendez mentioned in terms of the jobs, many of them now have to work at home and had to change their schedules, had to change their spaces that you were used previously to work, but also acquire new responsibilities, like for instance, had to take care of the home life or the school life for their children. And therefore, that meant a lot of accommodations. And for many couples, this is also another cause of stress, given the resources that may or may not have in order to make all these changes. For instance, now the children who are not going to school, that meant obviously, depending on how many children they had and the ages, of course, different levels of attention that they had to provide, especially because if they, for instance, previously had additional help from outside, now they could not get that help. So that also added to the stress in the family as well as in the couples, and demanded for couples to certainly recreate or reorganize, their family life. It's yours, Tatiana.
One of the things that happens during this time is also that has increased the number of infidelity issues and in different places around the world. And we know there's more stress, and this is just general, statement literature. There is less sexual and relationship satisfaction as a result of all these different kinds of stressors that Dr. Caro and I have described. So people have the tendency to engage in behavior that might potentially be associated at risk for infidelity. But what kind of behaviors? I think that the most common one is the one related to the use of technology. Like, for example, people has been contacting, right, ex-partners during the pandemic. So people that they have not been in touch, for a long period of time. So it can be sense of longing, nostalgia, and, feeling lonely also was a part of this decision making, and say, I wonder what so-and-so is doing. I'm just gonna drop a line, So some people use WhatsApp and send some messages and start engaging in conversation just to remember what it was like. Because if we think about it, all of us, we have been completely isolated. And just think about our relationship. Or some of us, we have been in different circumstances. Some of us alone, others in a relationship, for those people whose relationship is not optimal. So they have been more inclined to use this kind of connection during the pandemic. So it was reported in this research study, for example, that there was a dating site. Actually, this dating site is called Ashley Madison, and it's a Canadian online dating service for people who are married or in relationship. So they reported that this dating site added 17 new members per day during the pandemic. So you can imagine what that means, right? So it has been reported too that the reason why people, try to chat with somebody besides the spouse is that this need for emotional validation. And myself as a couple, as a marriage and family therapy, I asked myself, okay, so there is a need for emotional validation. So what is happening in the relationship? So does that mean that the person is not being validated enough? Or maybe, this is not part of their own relationship. So the fantasy of pursuing a secret relationship, sexual relationship. So we need to think about, this is very interesting information because we need to think about what is happening just in the context of the relationship. How much communication, how much satisfaction, mutual satisfaction there is in the couple. I think that at some point during this presentation, we're gonna talk about the assessment, pre-assessment, of what happened before the pandemic in the relationship. But just so those things to think about of what is, part of the topic, that therapists need to take into consideration. So what I would like to do now is to explain a little bit, I want you to think about all the things that we have described as part of the stressors in a relationship. So we experience, or couples, people in general, partners experience different kinds of emotion. So I lost my job, I am now working at home. I have to multitask, you know. Previously, I was the person who took care of everything, or I wasn't the person who took care of everything. And now I have other commitment besides the regular schedule, right? And I don't feel enough support from my partner, or I don't feel that my partner cares about me, or I don't feel that, you know, my partner validates and acknowledge my effort to try to have some sort of normal life in spite of all these constraints. So all of these things bring to some extent some sort of confusion, anger. I might feel hurt or despair or in shock, or I might feel anxiety. Some of these feelings at the same time, other depends on the situation. So the way I just want you to think, you know, imagine a couple in which this couple, because this depends on what stage on the family life cycle people are, right? So if you are, for example, this is a couple with small children, or this is a couple with teenagers, for example. So just think about a couple in which there are so many things to do, and at the same time, both parents are working, you know, in the same house, and one of them is over functioning and the other one is under functioning. So the one who's over functioning, so feel hurt, right? Feel hurt immediately because it's say, you know, I don't think it's fair that, you know, he, for example, is not supporting me enough. But I don't go and this person doesn't go and talk to his partner and say, to her partner and say, you know what? I feel really bad that you are not just, you know, looking at me, or, you know, I'm wondering if you would be able to do fill in the blanks. So what happened in this case, you know, this person will say, maybe he just don't love me, or, you know, of course he doesn't care about anything in this house. So what this person is going to be showing is anger, right? It's going to be showing anger. So that is kind of like the secondary emotion. That's what the partner see, the anger. But the partner does not realize that in reality, what is underneath that anger is hurt. So that is the primary emotion. Where does this emotion really come from? From that point of feeling hurt. So that is what in couple therapy, we work on those specific things. So not necessarily with the persons see immediately, but what the meaning of that and where those things are coming from. So kind of like this picture, you know, so you see different kind of things, seeing a person who is angry, you know, who is sad, but in reality, the person feels lonely. And sometimes in a couple relationship, partners do not know how to share those feelings. So there's a partner response in like, this is what you're seeing here, you know, but this is how the person really feels. So sometimes this person might withdraw or might engage in more conflict, right? So there is a person who is actually, it's like describing therapy, like who is the one who is always looking for a problem, right? But there's other people who describe one of the partners. So I am talking to this person all the time. I'm talking to him, I'm talking to her, and it seems that she doesn't hear me, and she just leaves the room and she just disappear. So he comes the other person and follows the person and try to get a response, and he doesn't get it. So partners will engage in different kind of responses, and that's what they need to be aware of. And when there is a conflict, how do we solve it? Because we are not aware, may or may not be aware of in what kind of pattern do we engage. Sometimes we withdraw, sometimes we unconsciously look for more conflict, sometimes we just don't respond because we want to avoid another problem. But the other person who is on the other side thinks that you don't care about, you know, that this person doesn't care about me. So this is what we call kind of like the cycle, right? In what kind of cycle the couple engaged. And this is kind of like in a negative cycle, right? So the more I pursue for some specific behavior, for connection, for attention, for response, the other person withdraw. And it's not because the other person withdraw because doesn't love this person or because doesn't care about that person. It's because the way how the person tried to pursue that partner does not come across in a way that is inviting. So if I raise my voice, I will think that the person will hear me, and that might not be the case. So conversely, that person becomes, distant, or try to be away from that situation. So just think about, a family, as I said before, in which there are little kids, or there are other circumstances in which the person has just lost their job, or the person, for example, uh, have this person parents, is sick with something else, not necessarily COVID, and like now have other relatives who are sick as well, so they say, how am I gonna do? I mean, there are not enough beds at the hospital. How about if my relatives gets worse and worse? So the person tried to be strong, but it's feeling lonely, it's feeling isolated, it's feeling under pressure, it's feeling anxious. But it comes a point that there are so many stressors that at some point it might emerge like anger. So how do, in a relationship, how a couple can distinguish, where those feelings, emotions are coming from? So what happens there? How can they make that overt and they can create a mutual understanding? Okay, so that's a little bit of what we will be talking about.
Yes. So in all this context, we need always to consider the previous history of the relationship. One of the things that we are also finding in the research is that certainly this pandemic is affecting all couples, but it's not affecting every couple in the same way. In fact, many couples are finding that this pandemic, it is an opportunity to get closer, to get to know each other better, to maybe reorganize their life, to find more things to do together. But on the other hand, the couples who are doing worse are those couples that already had some vulnerabilities present in their relationship. Some contextual vulnerabilities, for instance, in particular, if they already were having a precarious financial situation, for example, and this pandemic has worsened that. Also, if they had previous unresolved conflict. So certainly in the past, perhaps one way in which they resolved this conflict was by separating, by keeping distance. And the pandemic has taken away that possibility. So certainly that means that in many cases, that could facilitate the escalation of conflict. And of course, also some individual vulnerabilities that one or two members of the couple might have, for instance, attachment insecurity or depression, of neuroticism, or other problems with emotional regulation, particularly anger, who in many cases, when escalates, of course, can even develop into violence. And also if there were issues of substance abuse. So if this already was present before the pandemic, certainly now this could have meant that more chaos for the couple relationship and more chaos for the family. Then the next one, see. So something that I thought a lot about is then what to do about this particular situation. Now, conflict in general is a normal aspect of any relationship. It is expected, but it doesn't mean that has to escalate into verbal fights or verbal violence or physical violence. So something very important, and this is what Dr. Melendez-Rhodes referred to before as well, is how to deal with all these feelings, with these emotions, how to resolve the conflicts. And there is when we find the importance of effective communication, no, and problem solving. It's really one path that helps couples to manage all the stress and all the things that we have mentioned before that are caused by the pandemic, and in particular for couples that perhaps had conflict in the past, and now they had no way out but to find some way to resolve them. The next, please. So from the studies of Stanley and Markman, they have identified 4 types of safety that are very important in order to manage conflict. And in this particular environment in which we live, obviously to also prevent the escalation of conflict. And I'm just going to mention each of them briefly, and maybe later I will come back to some of them. The physical safety is obviously the bottom line, in terms of how safe feels each member of the couple in their environment, where of course there shouldn't be any violence at all. No, that's really the basic safety that we all expect. But also they talk about emotional safety. And when we talk about emotional safety, it means that each member of the couple should feel able to talk to the other without fear of being rejected, abused, but should really expect that the other is going to be able to listen and is going to be able to support the person and feel like they both are part of a team. So that's what they describe as emotional safety. And when they talk about commitment safety, it also has to do with the couple's ability to see themselves in the future, and also that they can share things together, even now in the midst of this pandemic, that they can work together for a better future. And that's important in particular because commitment is one of the strongest factors that come out in the research that predict also the satisfaction, or is connected to the satisfaction in any couple's relationship. And lastly, the community safety that has to do with the fact that each member of the couple also needs to have access to other connections, social connections. So even though, of course, it's important for the couple to share and to feel as connected as a team, it's also important that each member has their own connections with other friends or relatives or family. This, of course, has been affected by the pandemic, but still it will be important that each member of the couple doesn't isolate from the context that supports him or her in this or any other situation. Okay. It's yours, Tatiana.
Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the assessment piece. We were going to be elaborating this, more specifically when we start making some general recommendations. But I think that we would like to start saying that there are different aspects that we evaluate in the course of therapy, so we have more formal assessment and we have interviews. We usually put the couple, we enact things to try to figure out how couples communicate, how couples resolve problems, navigate conflicts, so on and so forth. But this is just a general assessment. It's not the only thing that is done, but just to give you an idea of something that if you are in a relationship, you need to think about. How do we connect? How do partners connect and talk to each other? How, for example, a couple say, I need you. How, I'm feeling lonely, I need you. How does a member of the couple reach out to each other? How do the partner spend quality time together? During the pandemic, it has been really difficult, right? Because we have been overwhelmed, but all these changes, we have to readapt. We have to create a space, an office, and try to work more hours perhaps than what we used to have. The boundaries are not really clear, or were not clear, because we were receiving messages from everybody. So that took away quality time. So the key here is intentionality. But coming back to the connection and talk to each other. So it is important that the first thing that couples recognize is what are kind of like the triggers, what triggers me to, for example, get away, and ignore my partner, or maybe attack, or feeling just respond attacking. So my partner, for example, asked me, hey, I wonder if we should, I don't know, I wonder if we should eat out today. What? Now you want to spend the money and you don't care, we don't have enough money to pay. And then probably what the partner was saying is, I have seen you, the partner is thinking, I have seen you working a lot. Maybe you need a break, and it would be good if we eat out, right? Or we order something, right? But the person thinks that, he or she wants to spend the money. So it's one action with two different meanings. So how do we really connect? Is there a mutual understanding? It's like the two of us are on the same page. Do I know what my partner is telling me, and does my partner understand me? Sometimes we need to have some sort of clarification to that. So during pandemic, the level of stress has increased. So we are more sensitive to react and sometimes to overreact to some specific stimulus. So we need to slow down and we need to calm down so that we're able to hear and sometimes confirm. Is this what you're saying? Is that what you mean? Help me, I need some clarification of this, or I didn't quite understand, and that those clarification components are very important, because otherwise we are defensive, right? Or we might become paralyzed. It's kind of like the same situation that happened sometimes in PTSD, the freeze, flight, and freeze, right? So we want to make sure that there is this common understanding for couples. So how do partners spend quality time together? So this is kind of like difficult, but as I mentioned before, it's about being intentional, right? So create a date time. So yes, we had a lot of work to do. Yes, we had to take care of the children. Yes, I'm exhausted, but we also need to know our own bodies. We need to know what our limits, and that's important as communication. What is a common time in which we can be together and we can enjoy each other doing whatever kind of activity. And during therapy, people do different kind of things, just putting in a jar, different kind of for example, activities that they can do during the week, like both members of the couple, so that they put things that they feel that it would be fun for them to do. So it depends on the situation, because during the lockdown, right, none of us were able to leave, so everything had to happen inside. So as the time goes by, so there is more flexibility. So perhaps there are other things which just need to be created, things that can be incorporated so that couples can spend quality time together. It's important, it's in mutual agreement, and it depends on the couple. It's not a recipe, because some people like to be surprised. Some people like kind of like some preparation for it. Some people like things that are more organized. Some people like to know what's going to happen. So knowing what kind of things your partner likes, it is important to see, to kind of like do an activity that both of you enjoy together. How do partners manage conflict, disagreement, and negativity? that is a very important thing, because as Dr. Caro mentioned earlier, you know, here it's very important the history of the couple. You know, we know that when we come into a relationship, you know, as a couple, we also bring the way how we used to connect early on with our parents, you know, with our caregivers, with our relatives. So sometimes those kind of patterns comes into our current relationship and have an impact. So it's very important to know, sometimes people are not aware, like when we are in therapy, we explore all these components, you know, so what's happening now somehow in this relationship somehow has been influenced by what happened in my early years, you know, of life in relationship to my family. So what do couples do, for example, to manage conflict? Like some of them might, for example, take some time out, right? So some people might say, well, you know, I think that it's better for me to be somewhere, you know, or just if I notice that this has escalated, so I'm not going to be able to engage in that difficult conversation. But it's different if the person just disappear. That is to say, you know, I think that we need time, you know, to being able to reflect and to think about it. And if we come down, it's going to be better when we come back in, you know, we talk about it and try to find a solution. So somehow in the message, you know, this needs to be clear that there is a willingness to engage in that conversation, but in a moment in which the emotion is not up here, right? So because the problem comes when people feel ignored, rejected, dismissed. So one of the things, for example, that Markman shared in part of his research is that people need to learn, you know, how to engage in casual talk, so navigate daily responsibilities, how to manage, for example, conflict talk. So what happened with the disagreements again? The French talk is the one that creates connection, right? That is just in general, create connection and intimacy. And the other piece of this part is like the support talk. It's kind of like, I know that I can rely on my partner. I know that I can reach out my partner because my partner is going to be there for me. So if I share with my partner, you know, I have an issue here, I can predict that my partner will take time to sit down to listen, you know. So let's say, for example, that this person cannot do it at this moment. So this person can say something like, you know, this is not the best time. I know that this is something very important to you, and that you are pretty upset about that issue. You know, I wonder if we could do it at this specific time. You know, I want you to know that I know that it's important to you. This is not the best moment. Would you mind if we do it a little bit later? Of course, it depends on the topic, no? Because some topics are more urgent than others. So we need to take that into consideration. But, you know, overall, I think that is something doable. And that's what couple needs to practice, you know? So this is very related to something that I'm going to speak later, which is the are you there for me, no? Which means flexible, responsive, and engaged. You know, so I know that if I need something from my partner, I am pretty confident that, you know, I will have, you know, I will feel very comfortable going and sharing that with my partner. So during pandemic time, it has been difficult because most of the time, the only person that we have was our partner. So it's just somehow people just got burdened as well, because there was not only the couple relationship, there were other relationships also that people need to pay attention to. So I think that this specific time in pandemic, you know, managing conflict, disagreement, and negativity is a critical component. At the same time, how do partners negotiate personal free space time? Yes, so you can say, you know, I love my family, but I feel that I need time for my own self. I am done. I have pay attention to everybody. I cook, I did the laundry, I work, I reply emails, you know, you name it, talk to my family, and I am exhausted. I just need a time for myself. This has to do with connection as well and with communication. How do I share my thought, with my partner, and say that this is my time for me, whatever the time it is, because each couple is different and each couple has different needs as well. So, you can do a hobby. It's very interesting because now think about yourself. Many people have engaged, in cooking, for example. No, everybody has become a chef suddenly during pandemic time, and people have developed different kind of skills that are, they said that they thought that they were not able to do it maybe before, so they took the challenge to do those things. Or like there are more handymans now, because they didn't have any other option. There were not going to be anybody to come to the house to fix something. So now people have discovered some specific skill that they don't have. And this is also important to acknowledge in a couple relationship. I am seeing you, validate what the partner is doing. I'm seeing you, provide compliments, right? For something that the person is doing. But at the same time saying, this is a time that I need for myself. I just, whatever it is, the time, and do something that really fulfill your life. So that's very important as well. So let's see here. Yeah.
Okay, so going back to the emotional safety and what to do to facilitate the communication that needs to happen in order to do all the things that Dr. Melendez-Rhodes has said. Because certainly, even though there might be the good intentions, the intentions might be there, sometimes couples may sabotage their own opportunities to resolve conflict or to improve their relationship if they develop patterns of communication that actually increase the distance between them. And once that happens, can you please go? Okay. Once that happens, of course, it becomes like a vicious cycle where every time there is a conflict, we avoid it, or when we try to communicate, we explode, and therefore the next time avoid it again, because we already have a pattern in our head that if we try to talk, it's going to explode. So therefore it can become this cycle where in fact now in the pandemic can become even dangerous in some situations. So what are the threats to this emotional safety? Is first of all, this escalation from anger to hurtful comments. So anger is something that can occur to any of us in any situation, and it can happen in couples. But something that is important is that each member of the couple learns to identify what are their triggers of anger. And of course, that wouldn't be the time to try to resolve a disagreement if we are already angry. So we have to, one of the main things to do is to avoid this escalation. Certainly now more than ever, we're going to need to talk about things that we need to do to keep ourselves and the family safe. But we need, above all, to find this space, this emotional safety that allows us to talk about these things without escalating. The other thing is invalidation. And this is a pattern when one partner is basically in a more subtle way putting down the other partner. So the things that we say, or that couples say to each other, certainly can be another way to stop the flow of the communication. So if, let's say, somebody said to the other, oh, well, you see, as usual, whatever you say doesn't make any sense, right? Saying something like that certainly is invalidating the partner, and the other person is going to say, well, I'll never tell you anything anymore. No. So that's another thing that we need to avoid, because, again, to develop this vicious cycle of avoidance and explosive conflict. the avoidance, even though many times, at least temporarily, might work, no? But in the long term, certainly what does is leaving the conflict unresolved and maybe provoke more and more distance. So sometimes, unfortunately, temporarily, yes, you might leave if you are angry, especially now under these conditions, but it's important to come back and try to resolve the situation once the anger has dissolved. And of course, especially in topics as important as, well, you know, how we're going to take care of things now in the house, or how am I going to support you, or how much or what kind of support I need from you. So avoidance can help very temporarily, and sometimes it's actually necessary temporarily, but it's not the solution. And the other thing is a little bit what Dr. Melendez-Rhodes also mentioned in terms of negative interpretation. One of the problems and one of the threats to emotional safety is this kind of mind reading that sometimes happens between couples, but is basically saying, well, you know, you brought this, or you tried to do this for me. What do you want from me? You know, what is your hidden agenda? You know, or basically make interpretations, negative interpretations. No, yeah, you just do that because, you know, you don't believe in me, or you don't trust me. And so even a phone call can be misinterpreted like that. No, you're just calling me because you want to control me. No, and basically maybe I'm calling because, well, that's all I can do right now, or to find out how you're doing. So this is very important to consider, because especially in times of stress, you know, sometimes these things can become more obvious. But if it happens, you know, if this is going on, certainly what that means is that, first of all, we need to realize that this problem exists, and we need to find ways to talk about the problem, you know, that we have this happening, and what we need to do to help each other to create a emotionally safe place where we can talk about what we need to talk about. Okay, you're next, Tatiana.
Sorry, you have 15 minutes.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. So we have talked a lot about, you know, all the negative things that can happen in the relationship, but we also have found that, you know, there are positive things that happen in the relationship, or that have happened. You know, people have reported to spend more time, or saying, I kind of like have rediscovered some things. I didn't know that my partner have this specific gift or talents, you know, or actually my partner really was good with the children, or that my partner was good at filling the blank. So not everything has been negative. I think that is also this time of the pandemic has provided some sort of break, you know, in our regular life. And, you know, it has provided an opportunity to work on our relationship, even if we didn't intend to do that. So in an indirect way, it did. It could make it safe to connect as well for some people, I would say. And that's something that still needs to be done, and people need to work more on that. Some people have become more intentional and become more creative in the things that they want to do when it comes to their relationship. Some people have become more appreciative of their partner. Some people have seen how the strength that their partner have shown during times of, you know, in times in which they have been challenged by, for example, illness, or family issues, or external issues, you know, and people have not given up. So they have continued, they have reinvented themselves, they have become more creative, they have taken different kind of action that make not only their family feel safe, but also their own relationship. So people have been parenting as a team, you know, so if a parent was uninvolved to some extent intentional or unintentional. So this has been a good opportunity in which everybody somehow played the role of a teacher in one way or another, right? I don't want to generalize and say that all these things happen in each family, but we also want to highlight the other side of the coin. Um, as you know, as we move forward, you here with the pandemics and just for the future, it's important to recognize the patterns, you know, when we engage in patterns blaming or withdrawal, when we say, well, you know, I'm not doing this because you didn't fill in the blank. Or, you know, I prefer not to engage you at this moment because it just don't feel right. So I'm leaving. Or, you know, I become isolated from the rest of my family, or especially in the relationship. We also have heard people saying, you know, we haven't talked for days. You know, we got mad at each other and we just were, you know, our apartment is very little, so there was not too much opportunity. It felt weird not to be talking to each other, right? And so we didn't know how to manage that. And everything started because I felt criticized because I didn't do something or I didn't do it as that person expected. So those things are like cues. So it's very important to be aware of that. As Dr. Caro said, and I said it early, what activates me or what does trigger me, that's make me engage in this behavior, because this behavior is only keep me away, you know, of my partner. So the closer I am, the safer I will be, right? And again, this is, you know, based on the theory of Dr. Susan Johnson in relation to emotionally focused therapy. Is this, are you there for me? You know, so is my partner gonna be accessible, responsive, and engaged? You know, if I feel something, is my partner gonna respond? My partner will respond to that. You know, if my partner will be available when I need my partner. Is my partner going to be able to show me reciprocity? So I want to spend time with my partner. Does my partner want to spend time with me? You know, because this mutuality is what creates safety in the couple relationship. You know, so people put safety in different things, you know, in a house, in a car, or on more material things. But what is the structure, you know, or the skeleton of the couple relationship? Is the closeness, is that I know that I'm going to be with a person with whom I feel safe, I feel understood, I feel that this person has my back, right? I feel that this person, that we will take care of each other in different ways, you know? So not everybody functions or responds in the same way. So people say, well, but I haven't heard that this person loved me. And the other person say, yes, but I do love you. Do you remember that I did this for you? So what is the love language? You know, some people are more physical, others prefer to show gift, other people are more spontaneous, other people prefer to do something for the other person. So it's about kind of like understanding, you know, I need to understand my partner's way of showing me that he or she cares, right? So if the same thing works for us. Um, so we have some general recommendations for people. I think that we have sent many recommendations, Dr. Caro and I, throughout the presentation, but we just kind of like want to make it more, uh, you know, more obvious. So we encourage people to develop an emotional regulation skills, you know, for both members of the partner. It's just not individual, right? So this has to do, for example, with how do I feel triggered? How do I calm down? You know, people kind of like practice different things, you know, some exercise, some others do mindfulness, some others, you know, engage in meditation, in relaxation techniques. So how do I come back, you know, uh, to feel, you know, just more perhaps able to engage in a conversation or to engage, you know, in some disagreement. You know, if I'm not emotionally regulated, so chances are that will end up escalating, you know, and become more upset. You know, depends on what we're dealing with. It's important to name, acknowledge, and validate the feeling. You know, if I'm able to recognize something that upset me, I should be able to name it and acknowledge and have, you know, the partner, you know, I'm seeing you are feeling this way. Is that right? Is that how you feel today? Is there anything I can do? You know, do you need anything? So some kind of like mutual response. And some people say, I don't want to tell her anything because she will get madder, right? And that is something that, for example, people need to work on. Um, Identify again this feelings that need to be addressed. You know, if I know this or my partner know this, you know, that most of the time I kind of like feel overwhelmed and feel maybe angry or frustrated, disappointed. So those are the feelings that need to be addressed, because at some point I kind of like try to work on those things, but it's not working, you know. So that's when people need to realize, okay, I may need another person who help me with this, you know, perhaps a therapy, because we cannot make our partners our therapists, right? So that's not good. um, Self-care routines, whatever is kind of like a self-care routine you engage in, because it's important, you know, as we are doing better, so we're gonna project that into others. So that also is very related to emotional regulation skills, where facilitate those processes. Create different kind of coping skills. So I shouldn't be having only one. Like, for example, living is somehow, you know, it's kind of like the way how some people cope, you know, but for many people it's involved different kind of steps. You know, some people might be more resilient than others. You know, some people might engage, you know, faster with their partners than others as well. So improve just in general communication skills with your partner. So think to take into consideration tolerance management. So the triggers, again, is something important to consider. So am I looking here for perfection? So if I tell my partner, can you help me with this? And if my partner doesn't do it as I want it, you know, so I immediately will respond with criticism. So I have to kind of like measure a little bit my own level of tolerance for that. You know, how do I manage my frustration? So to de-escalate, how do I learn to de-escalate? You know, so Dr. Caro talked a little bit about that early on. And in relation to clarification, she talked about mind readings, right? So I need to clarify sometimes how I feel, because it's easy. You have to pay attention to nonverbal communication, because if I respond in a way that I just hear that my partner, you know, my partner asked me a question, you know, like, hey, you know, how about this? And I just responded in a way that feels attacking. So, you know, then my partner, when I said, do you understand? They're like, okay. And, you know, my partner turned his head and just leave. So if something happens, right? So maybe my partner misunderstood, but also it's the way how I express myself. So I kind of like, instead of just leaving it there and pretend it didn't happen, it is important to clarify. It will take a few extra minutes, but it will make it easier. It will make it better. We need to learn how to interrupt the negative cycles again that I explained earlier. You know, so this pursuing withdrawer, you know, engaging in a conflict, and the other person trying to get away of the conflict. The more I engage in the conflict, the more the other person tries to be away of that situation. So it's like it's a it's a it's a negative cycle, you know. And in order to stop that, all the previous things that we have talked about needs to be in place. Show appreciation is critical. You know, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, showing appreciation, you know, I know that you did good. I know that you tried to make the effort to fill in the blank. So I really like what you did today, you know, and describe the situation. I know you were really tired today, however, you helped me with, and say what the person did, you know, because those things are important. Sometimes a simple thank you is not enough, you know, so just to say, oh, thanks, you know, so the person doesn't feel validated, doesn't feel acknowledged, because just think that this person invested time, energy, emotions in trying to maybe do something for you, for the family, for the relationship. So it is important, some people say in therapy sometimes, but I'm not expressive. Well, that's okay. You don't have to go over the top and just make a party because of that. But in your own way, try to show that appreciation. So you have to kind of like explore yourself. How do I show that? How do I come across to my partner? That's important. And vice versa, no? It's not, because this is not only one way, it's a two-way situation.
Okay. We have 3 minutes, so I'm gonna try to be a little bit fast here. Another recommendation is very important. Stanley and Markman say, decide and don't slide. Because what happens is that many times during important transitions, we kind of let things slide. What does it mean? We just let things kind of happen. But what they recommend is that it's just precisely in those moments that the couples need to talk about what is happening, to decide what they want to do, and not just simply let the time decide, what occurs and what will bring it. So I think that is a very important recommendation, because now with so many things that are happening so fast and so many things that we have to take care of, sometimes couples just might lose track, and that's when sometimes misunderstandings or conflict may arise. No? So the more they can decide on what they need to do, the better. The next one. Okay, the next one is yes. And in terms of commitment safety, like already Dr. Melendez-Rhodes mentioned, focus on positive connections. And this is something very important. Build up the sense of future together. As much as now we are dealing with a lot of stress and a lot of problems, the pandemic is not going to be forever. At some point, it's going to stop. So it's very important for their own mental health as well, think about planning about things that they can do later as a couple and as a family. And obviously, the more they spend doing things together that they enjoy, they also are going to strengthen their attachment and their commitment. And finally, this phrase that I picked up from one that I read to prepare for today. This is, you Americans will recognize this. Ask not what your partner can do for you, but what you can do for your relationship. So this has to do with the next slide that is about what you do in terms of your part. In the next one, please, the next slide. Do your part. That means think what you can do for your relationship, and don't just ask all the time what the other can do. That doesn't mean that we cannot express our needs and what we need from the other. But it's important that each member of the couple thinks about what I'm doing for this relationship. Bien, well, okay. So I think with that, we are almost finished. And Tatiana, you have the next one.
Okay, so just future consideration, just in general, so the pandemic is going to imply changes in relationship, in couple relationship, just in general. How we are going to prevent those things. The best way of how to prevent those things is take into consideration, an exploration of all the things or the factors that we have talked about during this presentation, and possibly engage in couples therapy if needed. Is that you are hearing this presentation, you say, hey, I see that I have, some difficult situations here that my partner and I, by ourselves, we won't be able to figure it out and maybe work it out. So it would be very important maybe that people consider to engage in couple therapy. So here there is an image in which there are two people essentially, who are separated, but in reality, inside of all of us, so human beings are just wired for connection, and sometimes this sense of isolation, what it means is like, I wish, I would be more connected or feeling more connected. Dr. Caro mentioned, this is also, we have to be accountable for those things, and we also have to be intentional. So we hope that you enjoy the presentation. So thank you so much for being here with us. We are ready for questions now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anna and Tatiana. That was a wonderful presentation. So now maybe we can make this round of questions a little bit bilingual, ¿no? Podemos hacer esta ronda de presentaciones un poco bilingües.
Claro.
Entonces, la primera pregunta es en español. Oh no, en realidad está en inglés. It's actually in English. The first question is, the creativity is an important variable when someone is through a process of change and has to adapt to a specific situation. In the case of love and relationships, is it also an important variable to consider?
It is, I think it's important, but well, I don't know if Tatiana, you wanted to say something as well, but I think, and I can answer in English as well, right? Okay. I think creativity is important, but obviously there are different levels of creativity, and in couples you find that as well. Certainly in moments of crisis, to be creative helps because you had to come up with a lot of solutions for things that you didn't expect. But I think that there are also resources that couples can access that can help them, beyond what they might, let's say, beyond the level of creativity that they may or may not have. So I think, yes, it's important. And if the couple or one of the members of the couple is creative or more creative, I mean, I think it's matter more of levels of creativity. But I think that we can compensate somehow if maybe we feel that we are not very creative, but accessing up to resources. And of course, if we have a partner that is creative, they can also partnership in the sense of how this creativity can help us to develop solutions or to plan activities that can help our family to deal with the isolation, the being limited for all the things that the pandemic has caused. So it is in summary, I think it's a variable, but I think it doesn't have to be a limitation. I think it's a matter of levels and how we can pull resources to help ourselves.
Mm-hmm. So I believe that definitely is a variable to consider. What I would like to maybe, I mean, we don't know where, where this question came from, but I think it would be important to clarify. So when we talk about creativity, what do we mean by that? And also what is the function of creativity? In what sense do we need to be creative? Do we need to be creative for enhancing the relationship? Do we need to be creative because somehow our relationship is kind of like more routinary and we need to get out of that? Or do we need to be creative as a matter of finding solution to some regular domestic things that we do at the house? So if we would have this clarification, perhaps we could expand our response. But I certainly agree with, what Dr. Caro mentioned.
Okay, great. Thank you. Another question is, how long can a couple be without seeing each other in person? Couples that before the pandemic used to meet frequently are now having tough times. So maybe you can both speak a little bit to that.
Sure. Well, there is not a specific time, no? This is not like okay, so after 2 months, you are done if you don't see each other. I think that what we need to each couple is different. Each couple has different needs. Now we have technology and, we can see each other, but of course there is not that physical connection. I think that's what people miss the most, is the physical connection, right? And this will vary from culture to culture. What I would consider, are variables such as commitment, for example. So how committed am I in my relationship? How much trust do I have in my partner? So the love component is important as well. So now love is a little bit subjective because it depends how it defined, depends on where you are, right? But I have seen many couples, who have not because of the pandemic, but because of other issues, they have been separated. So they have been in long distance relationship for 3 years or more years, right? And so they have reunited and they went into having a regular relationship. So I think it's like, do I have a project of life with this person? Because it's different, if your relation, if you kind of like were dating and then you start being, in a close relationship and they kind of like overtly you say, well, now we recognize or we acknowledge ourselves as couples. So that happened just right before the pandemic. It might be completely different from a couple who has been, for example, been together for 2 years or for a year and a half, and they already had a plan of life together. So think about, for example, in people who travel abroad to do a master's or to do something. So sometimes people are not able to come back or travel back and forth because of financial issues, but they had a project of life together. So they make it work. So I think that, sometimes long distance relationship or many times actually, many situations can be successful. So Anita, do you have anything to add to that?
See, yes, I was thinking about Carly Roosevelt's theory. She has a theory of investment,
Mhm.
and when talking about commitment, one of the things that, according to her theory, defines commitment has to do with precisely that, with investment. What she means by that is that a person will value a relationship also based on how much has invested in it. And by that, it means whether, for instance, has invested time, invested, of course, a lot of emotional investment in terms of the love, the caring, and all that. But the other thing that she talks about is that I also consider that that person is the best person I can be with, even if I had other opportunities to be with other people, even if there were other people that are available and that I would like. But no matter what, I will consider that the person I am with is the best investment that I have. So that is the best thing. So I think that also has to do with what Dr. Melendez is talking about, that it will depend, and some of and how this relationship has worked, how much investment, talking about Carly Roosevelt, has been made in this relationship. And in fact, yeah, there are people that can be separated, but certainly have put a lot of value in this relationship. So no matter what happens, it will still be there.
Thank you. And finally, tenemos una pregunta en español, que es, ¿cómo explicaría la psicología que algunas parejas durante la pandemia, ¿no?, hayan decidido tener hijos, ¿no? ¿Podría ser vinculado al aislamiento?
Yeah. Well, there certainly could be a factor. I think there could be a factor. I don't think that would be the only factor, but I think there could be other variables that might have to do with the when maybe I'm getting a little bit more psychodynamic here, but I mean the pandemic has faced us with our mortality, and I think there could be a factor related to that. In a sense, a child perpetuates us in some way. And it could be that maybe it's not totally conscious, but that could be a factor as well. Of course, being isolated and being more available or whatever, but I'm not sure that would be the only factor. It has happened before, during periods of time after the war. There was a boom, of births, and it has happened, when there are long periods of times where people have to deal with crisis. So So I think it might have to do with a combination of things. Perhaps, like I said, this facing death, facing and perhaps trying to deal with it in that way. A baby brings us always hope, and definitely is a symbol of the future. You know? So I think that's something that I think might have to do with that.
Mhm. Other people, I think that it's important to consider also, whether or not it was planned, so the couple were already planning. It was part of the conversation prior to the pandemic. And then as the pandemic, happened, so people say, okay, so we're going to be here. We're going to have the time, to being able to take care of the baby. We are going to be able to share the responsibility. So I'm talking about those ones that were intentional, because we have, so here the question is people who have decided. So that's kind of like make me think that this was intentional, that we was planned, right? So many others happen without planning. Well, in reality, that's not really matter, because most people, to some extent have more time now to take care. So also to perpetuate, right? So this is the right time. I see everybody surrounding me, maybe my relatives who are gone, now. And as Dr. Caro mentioned, it could have been an unconscious situation. And some other people just decided, that it was the right time for them. Because you need to kind of like think about the age of the couple, for example. So some people could be, reproductively challenged at some moment in life. And other people say, I really feel like having a family because I feel prepared. I'm going to be a good parent, or at least I have the willingness to do so. So there are multiple factors. The person mentioned, has to be with feeling isolated. That could be a point. And just to finish the question, I'm going to say, for example, here in the US last year, you couldn't find a dog. Okay, so all the dogs were taken. So you couldn't find any dog anywhere. In fact, my child wanted to have one, and we were to different places. We couldn't find one. Everything was, all of them were gone. And like now, probably I read a couple of weeks ago. So people were returning their pets, to the places where they bought them. And the reason for that is because at first they felt completely isolated, and they thought that it was the best thing to do for them, for their families. And, it was the right time to provide care, attention, love, so on and so forth. And but now, since, some of the regulations already are becoming more flexible, so people have more time to spend with the family outside. So now some of them are engaging in this situation of returning their pet. Which is unfortunate, of course, but think about, the situation as a child. Well, you cannot say, well, the pandemic it's almost over, I'm going to return my child. There's no place where to do that, right? So I imagine that people has been more intentional about it, and hopefully it's going to work out for them.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you both, Ana and Tatiana. Unfortunately, we don't have time for any more questions. Desgraciadamente ya no tenemos tiempo para más preguntas. But as part of the psychology department, we would like to thank our guests for being part of this Psychological Thursday event. A nombre del Departamento de Psicología y la Comisión de Relaciones Interinstitucionales, queremos agradecer a nuestras invitadas por participar de este jueves psicológico y compartir con nosotros sus experiencias. I also wanted to thank everybody who has joined us today. Y también aprovecho para agradecer a todos los que nos han acompañado el día de hoy. Y bueno, los invito a seguirnos en nuestras redes sociales y en Facebook para conocer de próximos eventos. Y también pueden revisar la página de YouTube donde colgamos los videos de los eventos. So thank you to all. Muchas gracias a todos. Y bueno, hasta la próxima oportunidad.
Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias a todos.
Buenas noches. Good night.
Buenas noches.